Welcome back to the third part of One Man's Faith. We're trying to finish up here on Revelation, and we're looking at the culmination of the covenants that we talked about, because Revelation is about a marriage between Jesus and the bride. I think somewhere in there too is the culmination of the marriage between God and Israel. We don't see this because the book of Revelation is about the revelation of Jesus, not about God. It's highlighting Jesus, and it culminates at the marriage. And there's some other things that are going on there, but I'm just trying to show you that this is the culmination of Revelation. It's getting to that point of the marriage, okay? And we just looked at the fact that it starts with Jesus coming. He knocks at your heart's door, and you let him in. If you let him in, the process starts. That's the way it was with the Hebraic marriage. The groom went to the bride's house, knocked. If they opened the door, it started. The first thing they did was they had a meal, and it says, "I will come in, I will dine with you." Okay? Now, in the Hebraic marriage, during this meal, there were 4 cups of wine taken. Okay? Now watch this. This is cool. I like this part. The first cup, both families covenant together to serve one another, and that cup of wine is called the cup of sanctification. Okay? It means they set themselves apart to each other. Both families agree to serve each other, to help one another. Okay? It's not just a one man, one woman thing coming together and the families are excluded. In the Hebraic marriage, the families were part of this. And both families agreed with this first cup of wine to sanctify themselves, to set themselves apart from anybody else, and those 2 families actually became one family. Okay? That's the first cup. The second cup, both families covenant to an eternal friendship. They agreed to be friends for the sake of the bride and groom, and for their own sake. It's kind of hard to come and serve one another. You're supposed to go beyond that to where they're friends, because the bride and groom come from those families, and they're going to be married together, so the families need to get together and to be a part of this thing. You see how in some cases, it probably with even your marriage, it wasn't that way, but that's the way it was supposed to be. Okay? This cup is called the cup of plagues or betrothal. Okay? That's the second cup. The third cup, the bride and the groom covenant together. Now, in the first cup, the families partake of it. In the second cup, the fathers and the bride and groom partake of. In the third cup, just the bride and the groom, and they covenant together to marriage. All right, it's called the cup of redemption or the cup of inheritance. All right, it seals the deal. Once they get to that third cup, it is sealed. They are together. Nothing is supposed to tear them apart. Okay? And then there's a fourth cup. And the fourth cup is called the cup of praise. And it is again taken by just the bride and the groom. And it's taken at the wedding ceremony. Okay? It's taken at the wedding ceremony. Now, I don't know if you picked up on this or not, but there are 4 cups of wine that are taken as part of Passover. And they are called the cup of sanctification, the cup of plagues, the cup of redemption, and the cup of praise. Did you catch that? In other words, what God started and what continued on with the Jewish people And in partaking of Passover every year, they were recommitting themselves to that marriage. And interestingly enough, nobody drinks the fourth cup. It's poured out. It's the one that is believed that Jesus said, I can't drink of this until I come again. Because that's when the marriage will occur. Okay? That's when the marriage will occur. So in partaking of Passover, you are recommitting yourself to that marriage covenant as a Hebrew person. Now, what about us? What about us? What about, we're not Jewish. Even though we've been grafted in. I mean, technically, according to Paul, we could say, yes, we are. But it doesn't mean, it doesn't mean that we're not in the same type of process. And we do this, even though we don't realize it. We do this. We go through the same process. There's the blood that was poured out for us. There's the bread, which is the meal for friendship. There's the salt that typically, especially in a messianic or messianic communion, they sprinkle salt on the bread. So we got the inheritance, which is and the salt, which combined are the friendship inheritance. The salt. We also have the Holy Spirit as a pledge of that inheritance, and then we have the coming of the marriage. So let's look. Let me just show you what happens. Now, do you remember the last, just before Jesus was to be crucified, it happened to be on Passover, and so Jesus went and he had a Passover meal with his disciples. He said, I have longed to have this meal with you. I believe that it's the only meal, the only Passover he had with all his disciples. Because see, Passover is a family thing. And I believe for the other 3 years or the 2 years, they went home and had Passover with their families. But in this case, they come together. It's the only Passover mentioned in the Bible. Now, yeah, they were around, they went to places, and Passover is mentioned, but there is no Passover meal mentioned about Jesus with the disciples except for this last one. Now, John 13 says, now before the feast of Passover, Jesus, knowing that his hour had come and that he would depart out of this world to the Father, poured into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and wipe them with a towel. And so he came to Simon Peter and said, Lord, do you wash my feet? And Jesus answered him and said, what I do you do not realize now, but you will understand. Peter said to him, never shall you wash my feet. And Jesus answered and said, if I don't wash your feet, you have no part in me. He was covenanting together with them. Washing their feet was inheritance. Okay? He was showing them a couple of things. It was, this was being part of the supper. He was trying to show them too servants. But we see that also in Matthew 26. It says that when he had taken the cup and given thanks, he gave it to them saying, drink, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant. So by partaking of that glass of wine, they were partaking of his blood, which he says was the blood of the covenant, the blood covenant, okay? So all these things work together. And then he also took the bread, and he says, now while they were eating, Jesus took some of the bread, and after blessing it, he broke it and gave it to his disciples. This is Matthew 26 again. And he said, take, eat. This is my body. So, and after this, he says, no longer will you be called slaves, but you will be my friends. No longer will you be called slaves, but you are my friends. So we see right there the three aspects of the blood covenant, the friendship covenant, and the sandal covenant, or the blood, the salt, and the sandal, or the inheritance, the friendship, and the servant, or the service. All three of those are shown, and that culminates into the marriage covenant. You see, we've got to have those in order to have a good marriage. You've got to know that you're not the kingdom, the king of the fiefdom. It's not your kingdom. You covenant together to serve. Jesus said through Paul, men, love your wives as Christ loved the church by giving himself for her. You see, that's service. That's service. A marriage is no good unless the husband and wife are friends. You've got to be friends. And then because you're married, there's the inheritance part. So you see, they flow together as part of the marriage. All right, let's take another break. Go ahead, get that third cup of coffee, and come on back. I'll be here.